Welcome. I'm Joel, by the way. What's your name?
Tony.
Tony. Good to meet you. And I didn't actually introduce myself to you. I'm Joel. What's your name?
I'm Corey Smith.
Corey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Where are you from, Corey?
One of those good old-fashioned Anglican churches.
Good. All right.
I live.
You were sitting there listening to me talk, wondering what I'd say, weren't you?
Yeah. I live northwest of Chicago.
Okay. Really? North of Chicago. It must be cold there. So that's
Yeah.
most of the year. I was just stuck in Midway Airport last week for a long time.
It's only cold for like 10 months.
That's cool. That's not too bad. It's only hot in Texas for 11 months.
Yeah.
So. Well, welcome. And where are you from, Tony?
College Station, Texas.
Okay, so you're not far from home.
Yeah.
All right.
Not Anglican, but we're Lutheran, so we're kind of in between.
Actually, I'm
That-
Lutheran.
You're Lutheran?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's great. And Methodist?
What Lutheran are you?
LCMS.
Okay, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really close there
Yeah.
to Anglican.
Yeah.
And what is your denomination?
Mine?
Your
Oh, Baptist.
Okay.
Yeah. Brooks, what about you? What's your denomination?
I identify as Baptist.
All right. Okay. So me too. I grew up Southern Baptist. Try not to let too much of that bleed into what we talk about. I know. Preparing for this conference is very diverse, and that's great. And so, and I don't think that worship is tied to any one denomination by any means, right? So neither is contemporary. And you do bring up a great point earlier, though. Maybe the room could have some different idea of this. Brooks mentioned he's noticed that a lot of contemporary worship, denomination-wise, is happening in the Baptist church, maybe not in some of the other denominations. Do you guys find that to be true? You know, I mean, do you see many Lutheran churches trying to do contemporary services?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
do? Okay.
I come from a church that has awesome contemporary music.
Okay.
Although it's only a couple Sundays a month, you know.
Okay.
I mean, and we're trying to move it further along.
I see. Okay. What about you?
I mean, the church I'm at right now, we do contemporary. It's a little bit more contemporary now than what it was when I started there.
Okay.
You know, and now we're faced with hiring, and because of my age and the millennial thing, I'm doing more of the traditional blend and hopefully blended stuff, and we'll bring in a worship leader. But I came from a Lutheran church up in St. Louis that worshipped about 3,600 on the weekends, and it was predominantly contemporary.
Okay.
So
What church is that?
St. John, Ellisville.
Okay.
Okay. So, you know, and I was just about almost 2 weeks ago now, I was in Germany with our adult choir and orchestra, and one of our orchestra members is actually the minister of music at an Episcopal church in LaPorte, and so I was picking his brain about all this stuff, you know, because I was like, so what about contemporary worship? Do y'all even mess with it? It's a really small Episcopal church. And he said they do it once a month, and it's very laid back. They just invite everybody with a guitar. They actually call it the guitar service unofficially, and if you have a guitar, come play with us, and they just hand out chord charts. And so it was that's their way of doing it, and people like it. You know, that wouldn't work at every church, but it works at his church. And so I guess every church is different, and every church has different congregations, and that's just what you kind of got to have in your mind when you're pressing forward with this. And so a couple of you are new. What we're doing, we're not talking about philosophy on why we would want to change from traditional to contemporary. This is for music ministers and song directors who find themselves in a position where that's what's happening, whether you like it or not, or whatever. And so we're just talking about how to do it. And so the first session was about the beginning stages of that. And so if you would like, you're welcome to the handout from that session if you weren't here for that. This one's about being right in the middle of it and some nuts and bolts of how to build something that works for your church. And then the next session will be about moving beyond just surviving Sundays and moving into something that's vibrant and meaningful for everybody involved. So living in the transition. We're going to talk about what I just said a little bit, building the right team, choosing instrumentation that works, and weathering the storms of criticism. which I'm not a master of that. I'm a master of getting criticized.
Really?
Updating the church's media and technology. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but not so in depth. If that's something you really need, you'll need to find other resources than me for that. We're going to talk about unity and how music and worship can be a grounds for unity instead of a grounds for battle in the church. And then we're going to talk about selecting music for your church. And so the first rule about building a team is that there are no rules. And I want to just say real quick that I believe that for worship leaders, one of our most important jobs is leading other musicians and artists to become worship leaders. Our job doesn't end at noon each Sunday, and we are called to raise up the worship leaders of tomorrow. That's a big part of this, and a big part of what I think each one of our jobs ought to be. And so I want to approach this idea of building a team with that in mind. That we're not just looking for people to fill a position, but we're looking for people to replace us someday. And I think that's a good mindset for us to have. As far as the fact that there are no rules, I don't think that your band has to have electric guitar, an acoustic guitar, keyboards, drums, and bass. It can have any or all or none of those things and be a new worship model that engages your congregation. And I've said in the earlier session, drums may be the last thing you need to add if you don't already have a contemporary service. And just don't. I don't want you to approach it thinking, well, we've got to have these things because this is what makes a modern rock band. Well, don't think that way. I led worship for almost 7 years at my previous church, and we were on the very contemporary side of blended. So like we did whatever we wanted to every week with no pushback on we didn't do enough hymns or all this or that. But because we never had a good electric guitar player, I almost never had electric guitar. And I'm an electric guitar player. That's what I grew up playing. I played in rock bands when I was a kid and college and stuff. So electric guitar is my love language. And I never used it there because I never had the right fit. I never had someone who could really do it. And we didn't have the resources to pay someone to do it. And so we just didn't have it. But we rocked. We played loud. You can do whatever you want with whatever you have. And some Sundays we didn't have a drummer. And that's okay. And we mentioned earlier, if you don't have drums working for you, then you can use something like a cajon or a djembe until you get the drums working right. Drums are really hard to hide, so just keep that in mind when you ask someone to play the drums. One thing I want you to consider when you're building your worship team is use your congregation. Use your congregants' gifts. A lot of guys, especially in Houston, you get this, Houston, man, church is big. It's not big business, but it's a big deal, okay? And our bands are a big deal. And there's a lot of guys making a living just playing guitar on the weekends at churches. And so it's insane because you got churches with multiple services paying so much per service. And so, okay, I'm playing at such and such church 4 times for this amount of money. I can just teach guitar the rest of the week. And that's a living. They probably make as much money as I do. And so, not every church is like that though. And where I'm from, I'm in Houston now, but where I'm from, that's not the way church is. Even the mega churches in Little Rock, like bigger than the church I serve at in Houston, they don't have the resources to pay their bands. So city to city, it's different. And not every city is super wealthy. Not every church has the resources to do that. So all that to say, don't feel like you have to have professionals leading your worship team. Use your congregation. Use people that God has given the passion and desire to do it. And this came up yesterday when we were talking about this, because we're going to talk about determining standards for like a budget to hire musicians. When I got to my current church, almost everybody on my worship team was paid, and we're slowly changing that culture. And I think it's important to try to change that culture. I'm not saying if you already have a budget to do it, just stop paying. If people are expecting that, you know, we kind of are grandfathering it out slowly. No one just got cut. But as people move on, my goal is to replace them with volunteers from within my church. And we're upfront about that. Not because I don't think people ought to be paid to play. Okay? It's because I feel like we've lost a sense of volunteerism. In particular with the younger generation, my generation, everybody kind of expects to get paid. But when I was a kid, if you just let me get on the stage, I'd follow you anywhere. I'd pay you to let me get on the stage. And I just don't sense that anymore. And I want to sense that again. I want people to have that desire to give.
But how's that working for you? Because that's where half my music budget, about $30,000 a year of my music budget is geared towards paying a professional praise band.
Right.
You know, I've got 9 guys up there every week, and most of these guys have been recorded with, you know, singers. And how are you transitioning?
Well,
or is that an outside?
No, it's
discussion?
fine. It's going well actually,
Okay.
and it hadn't happened overnight. I've been there 2 years, and so my first year I went way over budget, just because we didn't have people that we knew within our church that could play. Okay, so the chances are there might be people sitting in your pews waiting to play. And so what we've done is just try to find the people in our congregation that can play. And if you're bringing in outsiders, well, that's easy to kind of get rid of them. They don't really take it personally, you know, they're professionals. Now, there were a couple of church members on my worship team when I arrived that were being paid. And I just continue to pay them, and I will until they decide they don't want to play anymore. And I don't want them to quit. They're good, and I want them to be a part. But my new church members that I've brought in, I've been open and honest with them about what the situation was. And just tell them, you know, this is what I'm trying to build, this is what I want to do. Do you want to be a part of that? And if they do, and if they want to volunteer, then they come and be a part of it. And they know that this guy, that he could be in their Sunday school class, he's getting paid, but they also know that that's just the way it's always been for him, and we're changing the culture. And it's gone well. It's gone well. My Sunday morning band is almost all volunteer now. And we have a Saturday night service, and it's hard to get volunteers to show up on Saturday night, you can imagine. But the Sunday morning band's almost all volunteer. But I will stop and say my piano player, I would always pay. I will always pay my piano player. I just think it's too key, too important. And then I'll say this too. The next position that I'd be willing to always pay would be a drummer, because drums can make or break you if you're going to go that, you know, have a full drum set, drum band. Full band with a drummer. We're very fortunate to have a very professional drummer as a member of our church, and he was my first one to basically sign up and say, yes, let's do this and let's change the culture and have a volunteer band. But he's amazing. So he's a keeper. So, and he's an awesome guy. So it's gone well, but it's gone well with a lot of prayer and care. So you do it carefully, and it may not be the right thing, you know, but I felt like what we needed to do. So look for culturally appropriate instrumentation. You know, it just depends on where you are. I told you I served for almost 7 years in Arkansas. In Arkansas, it's not weird to use mandolins and banjos and things like that. It's really not weird to do that in Houston. We do it sometimes. Also, we have, you know, a lot of professional classical musicians that are part of our church, and we use them, and we use them a lot. We use cello and violin, and when I say culturally appropriate, you know, that's a very broad window, a wide open window. Anything that basically says whatever works at your church works, and you use whatever you have. And we have a lot of international. We have a very large internationally diverse congregation. So we got people from I don't remember how many countries, but a lot. And it's just kind of a microcosm of Houston. And so I try as much as possible to make sure that the people on stage are a microcosm of our congregation. And so a couple months ago, we had our worship choir up there, which has about 5 people from the Congo in it. So that's a big portion of our 30-person worship choir. So we sang a song in Swahili, and I made all the Anglos learn it, and they did, and it was great. And our congregation loved it. They didn't know what we were saying, but it was just this cool little moment where everybody was excited about what was happening, and a huge portion of our congregation was getting to worship in their heart language. And so stuff like that is okay to do, and it's okay to do in contemporary worship. You want to determine the standards with your pastor and your leadership for your worship team. And what I mean by this is like you want to determine with your pastor if your band members need to be church members. You want to determine if they need to be believers. It's going to be different in every scenario. There's good arguments for both of these, and I'm not here to tell you which one is right, but you need to do which one that you and your pastor feel is right. And you need to set a standard, and you need to stick with it. And, your band could be a mission field. But you also may feel on the other side strongly that if you're going to be on stage leading worship, that you need to have a strong Christian walk. Both have a lot of validity. So you just determine what's right for you, determine it with your pastor, and stick with it. And then here we get to this: determine a budget for hiring professional musicians. It's okay to do, but it's also okay not to do. And kind of what I was saying earlier, what I've realized is if you're in a situation where you actually have a budget to do that, you're kind of in the minority as far as churches go. Most churches don't have that sort of a thing. And honestly, like at my old church, the most I could have done would have been like $25 to have a drummer come in and play. But if we'd have put out what we called the boot, we'd put its old combat boot out in the lobby, and that was how we did love offerings at that church, he'd have gotten $200 for coming to play. So, if I had a buddy come in and play for me one week, or fill in for me or whatever, instead of doing a check request for him where I would have had to fight for $50 to $100, I just put the boot out and they'd get twice as much as I could have fought for them. You know what I mean? And so you got to be creative, but hopefully you'll be able to do some kind of budget, and if you're in a setting where you don't have the resources for it, then maybe save this for really special occasions. Save it for Christmas and Easter. Or if you're like in your situation and mine, just you got to determine it, and then you got to use it wisely through the year. And so, or know how to ask for forgiveness really well. So, also for your band, you want to consider holding auditions. And I say consider because I've never done this, ever. Never held auditions for an instrument, except for once, and it went really poorly. And so, but I've got friends that lead worship that they only audition their band members. And so there's good ways to do it. So I've just kind of asked around, and seems like a good rule of thumb is to have them prepare one song and play it for you, and then surprise them with a song. Some song they never heard, and see if they can catch it and play with you. It's a good thing to know if they're any good before you put them up on Sunday. Yes?
One of the challenges that have come up, we don't hold auditions as well either, but we've kind of used like the choir and the praise team as like a ministry opportunity, like for new folks that come in. It's like, hey, come, there's places to serve. But what's scary about that is that you don't really know how far they are. So we'll have the spectrum of like, hey, this person's a really good guitar player, and this person knows the 4 chords and can probably move the capo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is scary. What would you suggest? I don't know, just bring them down, or what would you suggest?
Yeah,
Maybe possibly going to
Some of our folks over here
auditions.
What I do with guitar players is I will schedule them. I'm gonna shut this door. I'll schedule a new guitar player on a week when I know that one of my really good guitar players is there, and then they just play rhythm guitar, and we can hide them really well.
Right.
With vocalists, vocalists are even scarier, I think. Try to pull them from choirs and people that I know can sing, you know, and or try to like, I do like hidden auditions where, you know, maybe I'll have someone stand, you know, that stood next to him in choir rehearsal, or someone who stood next to him in the worship center. The girl that leads worship with me all the time, she's incredible. Someone said to me when she first came to church, she's a college student, "Oh, that's Jessica, she can sing." I'm like, "Oh, really? A lot of people can sing, you know?" And so she was volunteering with our student ministry, and I was up there one night, and I grabbed the kid's guitar that was leading worship, and I was like, "Are you going?" She was going on the middle school retreat, and I was leading worship for it that weekend. It's like, "You're going on that. Sing a song with me real quick." And I just played and had her sing a song with me, and it was instant. I knew she's really good.
Yeah.
And I said, "Hey, lead worship with me this weekend." Well, that was a really safe setting, the middle school retreat. You know, if you mess that up, it's not going to be the end of the world. Well, you know, she's, for over a year now, she's led worship with me, camps with me, and stuff like that. She's awesome. And so you can find safe ways to audition them, you know. Or maybe you got a smaller service. You know, I'll use our Saturday night service is a small service. So I'll bring in new people to the Saturday night service, which is kind of more laid back, and it's, you know, it's a really chilled out situation. And so you can find, you know, so if you're not going to do auditions, just try people out once in a safer setting. If it doesn't go well, it's okay. Don't give them the idea that this is an ongoing thing, just a one-time thing, and then if it's good, then it can become ongoing, you know. So I don't know if that's good or bad.
Would
Y'all
you
think that's good or bad? I don't know.
I think the hidden thing's great. Would you consider a like, hey, why don't you come to a few rehearsals?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I just want to know you committed.
Yeah, come to a few rehearsals. You're not
That's
going to
the right
play,
person.
you know, but just come. Yeah, that especially with like someone who's really, really wanting to play.
Yeah.
Like they're asking you if they can play,
Right,
but
right.
you're not really sure if they can. That's maybe a really good test. See, you can just treat it like that. It's kind of a test. How committed are you?
Right.
Come to some rehearsals. That's a great idea.
I think it's all kind of on this scale, you know, how good they are versus how, you know, how much they want to be in. Because I mean, you could find plenty of amazing players, but you know, like the energy that they have might not be anywhere where you need it. And also on like how good they are, you know, I think that's always like church to church kind of differences. It's all about the standard you want to keep and how good they play, and whether or not you want to keep like a player who might have a little bit of trouble just because you know over time he's gonna catch on in like a couple weeks, maybe a couple months.
Yeah, some people just need a chance, and some people need a chance to mess up a few times. And I do think we have to be careful about how high of a standard we're setting. You know, we'll let anybody in our choirs, right? And you don't have to be able to sing to be in our choir. And and you know, obviously you do have to be able to play to be in the band, but that's kind of part of the whole idea of like you have to be professional to be a part of our worship ministry. Well, I don't think you should have to be, and it should be okay to not be perfect. And so, you know, you just, but it's, you know, you're the music minister of your church, and you know what kind of standard you want to set. You set that, and then you find the band that fits it, you know. And so, I do think it's important though to make it a safe place for people to play and express their gifts without feeling like they're not good enough. I think this is important. You should interview prospective band members or team members. And even if you've decided, you know, they don't have to be believers to be in our band, well, it's probably good to know if they're not, don't you think? I mean, it's a good thing to know. You just want to know where they are spiritually, because you have the opportunity to minister to them. You have the opportunity to help them grow. You're more than just their band leader. You're their worship leader, and you are going to be their pastor. You're going to be their pastor, because they'll spend more time with you than any other minister in your church. and you need to fulfill that role. So this is a great place to start, just with an interview. You get to know them and get to know their heart. You want to prepare your team. You want to even prepare them before rehearsal, and then you prepare them with rehearsal before you put them on the stage. This is especially if like they're brand new, kind of like what we're talking about. I think it's a great idea, Jacob. Come to a few warm-ups or a few sound checks if that's all you have, but just come to a few of these before you get up on the stage. I always remind myself that Sunday morning's a really difficult time to learn something new, because it's always stressful, it's always crunched for time, and so if you don't have a midweek rehearsal, how are you going to prepare them? You need to answer that question, because a lot of churches don't do midweek rehearsals. We don't for our worship teams. So you need to have a way of preparing your band, and we do it through Planning Center online. That's what we use. Anybody know what that is? It's a web. It's not really software. It's a website, but it works like software. And you load up the worship set, and it has MP3s, and it has chord charts and lead sheets attached to each song, and they can be rehearsing and preparing through the week. And that's what I expect out of my band members. And I expect the same thing from my volunteers that I do for my paid musicians. And because I kind of feel like if I expected less of the volunteers, they'd be offended by that. And honestly, my volunteers work harder. And that's the truth, they do. My volunteers work harder. They show up more prepared. And they're awesome. So here's another thing. Be honest. And be honest about how good it is, and be honest about what it sounds like. How many of y'all have ever heard Hillsong or seen a Hillsong music video, seen them lead in worship live? You never have?
Live.
No, just a video of them leading worship live. It's probably not what your worship service looks like, right? It's probably not what your worship center looks like. And maybe you're grateful for that. But a lot of guys are aspiring to something like that. But the reality is God didn't put us in Australia or New York City at Hillsong or London at Hillsong. He put you where you are, and He gave you the church that He gave you, and you need that church to be all that it is, not all that Hillsong is, or all that Passion is, or all that Bethel is. Be all that your church is, but at the same time, you need to be honest about how good it sounds, and you need to work to make it sound better, and even make it look better. I think it's important to watch videos of our worship services, so you can analyze yourself, analyze what you're doing, analyze what you're saying in particular, because I think that's where a lot of worship leaders kind of, shoot themselves in the foot is between the songs. We start talking. So that's where I always do the dumb stuff, and
the capo.
Yeah, I moved this capo and quietly tuned my guitar. Let me say something amazing to you. And yeah, it usually just comes out sounding really stupid. Well, watching the video can be painful, but it can be good. Your band members probably need to watch videos of themselves too, because they might not be as good as they think they are. They need to know that they're not as good as they think they are, right? Because probably most of us studied music in college. I would say the thing that made me a better singer was the critique I got from my teachers.
The juries, yeah.
Right, my juries. When I was told when I was told very painfully what I was doing wrong, I was able to correct it. Well, if you never tell your drummer that they keep missing one every time they do a fill, they're never going to fix it. And so you got to know how to do that. You got to know how to do that gracefully and gently also. Sometimes a video is a way more gracious way of doing it than just saying, bro, you're playing a 5/4 bar every time you do a fill. It's 4/4. All right. So at the same time, be encouraging, right? So after all that, you wanna be encouraging, because just as musicians have these big egos, they're also very fragile souls at times, and I think all artists are. And I think that really the big ego kind of feeds into that, because when we realize oh man, I'm not really as good as I thought I was, not even that, but just like when you realize that you're not doing something perfectly, it hurts a little bit. Because this is our art, this is what we're doing. We want this to be as good as it possibly can. And so you need to shepherd the hearts of your band members and your team. They need that. They need you to lift them up and not tear them down all the time. So be a kind band leader to them. They need that. Because they'll do better when they're encouraged. You need to communicate clear and reasonable expectations. You need, like, this is about learning songs before rehearsal, how often you're going to schedule them, and notifying them, and then at the same time, them letting you know if they're not going to be there. You want to avoid getting phone calls on Sunday morning saying they're not going to be there. Yes, Jacob.
How early do you have a rotation of singers and players, or?
Yeah, but it's not set in stone. It's
Oh.
It's kind of week to week.
Right.
So,
How early do you let them know?
Monday or Tuesday, but I usually try to nail it down with them on Sunday
Oh, okay.
if they're going to be playing the next week. But if I haven't done that, then Monday, Tuesday at the very latest, you know.
So they use that week to prepare, is that right?
Mhm, yeah. I try to have the worship set finished by Tuesday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
We have our worship planning meetings on Tuesday morning where we meet with our pastor and other worship staff and stuff. And I usually have the set planned by Monday afternoon, but then there's always room for it to change after that meeting. And so it's usually set in stone. And I try to have as far as like professional musicians go, we have to have our checks requested by Tuesday at noon. And so I kind of got to have my band scheduled by noon Tuesday regardless. So, or I've got to apologize. So your check's going to be here next week. So. You want to invest in student ministry worship teams. So if you're trying to change your culture and you want to use volunteers from within your church, and also you want to do your job of raising up your replacement, this is where this happens. And in my experience and my ministry so far, I've been in full-time ministry for 9 years now, so not too long. But even as long as, or as short of a time as I've been in ministry, my best adult band members have come up through student worship ministries, leading worship for their peers, and they will grow more doing that than anything else. Okay, a kid sitting in his room playing his guitar, never getting a chance to lead his peers in worship, is not going to be at the level he could have been, and if you take two kids with the same skill on the guitar, keep one in his room all through high school playing all by himself, and put the other one in front of his peers all through high school playing, this kid, he may not be any better at guitar, but he's going to be more confident, and he's going to be a better leader on stage, and he's going to, and so y'all know that it makes sense. But we learn so much on stage. You learn so much more when you're on stage. You don't even realize what you're learning when you're up there. But when you make mistakes, you learn. When you do things right, you learn. It all happens. And so get your students leading worship. Get them involved in student praise bands. If y'all don't have a student praise band, then if you can hire an intern to start one and lead one, do it. If you don't have those resources, then try to find time to do it yourself. And just give them all that you can. And students will just take and take and take. I mean, they are hungry for you and me to pour into them. The kids that are like you and me, the kids that love music and that love worship, the kids that are called to this, they're going to be hungry for you to pour into their lives. And so please do this. I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for people doing that when I was a kid. Okay, and so don't be afraid to do that. All right, let's talk about keys and instrumentation for your band. I've found that a lot of criticism comes when people are caught off guard or when they're made to feel uncomfortable. Okay, and so we want to try to alleviate some of that on a musical level by choosing keys and instrumentation that feel and sound soothing to the most sensitive church member. And one of the biggest critiques of contemporary worship and contemporary worship leaders is that we pitch everything way too high. And I am guilty of this. I'm guilty of it because to me, I feel like I can sing with way more power when I sing up high. But the reality is, if I do this on a regular basis, I'm going to end up with a bunch of people staring at me from the congregation. And that's not good. That's not our goal. And our goal is that people would engage and sing along with this. And one thing that I hear ladies say to me is, I have trouble singing with you because I'm not an alto. They'll say that to me. And so I try to, at first I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? What do you mean I'm not an alto? So here's what they mean. My melody line is too high for them to sing it an octave higher than me because they're not, because they can't really do that because it's just too high. But it's sitting in a place too low for them to sing comfortably because they're probably a second soprano, like the majority of women are second sopranos. The average female voice is a second soprano. And so male worship leaders need to keep the female voice in mind when we're pitching songs. And so what I do is, if I'm not really sure where a song is sitting, then I'll find either my wife, if I'm at home, or from in the office, I'll find one of the other staff members that's a lady, or just one of our other worship leaders, sing this for me. Is that comfortable to sing? If it's not comfortable, then I'm going to change the key until I get it comfortable for them to sing. This may mean that for me as a guy, it's not going to sound, everything it could be, That's okay. It's not going to be everything it can be if no one in the congregation can sing along. And so if you're the one picking keys, keep this in mind. If you're not the one picking keys, encourage the one that is to keep this in mind. And there's this great tool called CCLI Song Select. It eliminates all excuses for not finding the music in the right key, okay? Because you can put almost any chord chart or lead sheet in whatever key you want, okay? And so don't listen to excuses.
Although we women like the flat keys.
No, maybe not. And that's my next point. Not quite the next point. It's this one. It is. Can musicians play in the key you've chosen? Can your musicians play in the key you've chosen? So if you've got, I've found piano players to always complain when I put a song in the key of B. I don't know why they don't like 5 sharps. It's easy to put a capo on the 4th fret and play in the key of G for me, right? So think about this too. So here's where you compromise. Maybe the best key you found is E flat, okay? But maybe your band can't handle E flat at this point. But D is a breeze and E is a breeze for any rock band, okay? So just pick the one that's most comfortable vocally because they'll be able to play in either one of those keys just fine. Any of the white keys your band can play in. F will be the most difficult for them, but they can play in any of them. Okay, so just find the one. You might have to make a compromise here, but that's okay. Chris Tomlin loves to sing songs in D flat. I have no idea.
I love D flat.
You do?
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
well there you go. Well, you would love all these Chris Tomlin keys. They're often in D flat. I don't know why.
The one that seems to be a new challenge that I hadn't noticed before, I guess being in youth, but is now there's been a whole lot of octave and a half feel. When they'll toss the chorus up the octave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lord, I Need You does that.
Mhm.
Cornerstone does that.
We
Cornerstone
believe
does
the
it.
Newsboys they
Yeah,
do.
Yeah.
we believe
Yeah.
this.
And so it's one thing I did, but is took Lord, I Need You and put it's originally in B or B, I think it's in B.
B or B flat.
I took it down to G, but yet I sang up. So the
Mhm.
whole song's within the staff, E
Right.
E in the staff, rather than doing the.
Right. I talked about that very song yesterday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I do that very thing with that song. I put it in G a lot of times.
Yeah.
Because, and what happens is, it puts it puts the verse melody right where the chorus melody is, and both are very comfortable.
Right.
You don't have the same oomph or power when you get to the chorus, but everybody sings when you get to the chorus,
Right.
which in reality
Gives it more power.
gives it more power. That's right. And so, remember, worship's not about us and how cool we sound when we do it. It's about getting people to sing. So, yeah, it's a great
Well,
point.
it does sound cool when it goes up, though.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, here's another thought. Not every song needs every instrument. And, you know, if the song doesn't need drums, then tell your drummer don't play. Just don't expect your band members to automatically think this. You be clear about it and say, you know what, this song doesn't need electric guitar, and so you guys are going to lay out on this. If you just like make that clear up front, no one's going to get their feelings hurt. It's not about their skill for this song, it's about what this song needs, and so don't be afraid to leave something out. When you're building it, prioritize the instruments that you need. You know, if you want to have just kind of like the classic band, you know, that's always been a contemporary band, and you're going to need a bass guitar player, an acoustic guitar player, and a drummer, and a keyboard player. You know, that's kind of like the bare bones of the classic band. And then, you know, you add in electric guitar. As I said, I went 6.5 years with no electric guitar, and we were just fine without it. But drums, you know, you don't need to do drums if you don't have a good drummer. But if you have a good drummer, you know, it really sets it off. It really makes it good. The problem with drums, you can't hide them. So if they're not good, everybody knows. and it can make or break you. But you got to prioritize it, and you get what you need first, and use keyboards. You know, to use keyboards to fill up that space if you don't have the right electric guitar player. Use keys and pads or the organ. You know, you can work with your church organist to fill in some of that aural space to give it the oomph that it needs. You know, and that's the thing about the organ in contemporary music. It's always there. If you listen to a track, there's always some organ going on. It's usually like a rock, you know, Hammond B3 kind of a sound, but there's always some organ going. And so if you're making this transition and your church organist says, hey, I want to be involved in that, well, don't say, you know, there's no place for the organ in contemporary music, because that's not true. There is a place for it. It plays a different role than it played traditionally. It's not the lead, but it's there, and it can put in a nice layer of sound that really makes things sound good. You just got to be smart about how you use it. All right, let's move on. How do we deal with criticism? You guys can probably help me with this, because if you've been in music ministry for a day, you've probably experienced some criticism, and it's okay. It's hard to take, and you know, you should be encouraged to know that you're not the only one that's experienced this. We all have. One thing that we can always do and always need to do is listen humbly and respectfully. Just Saturday night, so 4 days ago, I walked off stage into the firing line from one lady. You know, she was just kind of letting me have it about the volume. And keep in mind, this is not billed as anything but a contemporary service. That's all it is. So why anyone would complain about the volume at this service, I have no idea, because we have two great traditional services that meet at other times. And but I was just taking it. I was kind of taking the heat for my sound guy. I was really tired. I had been traveling nonstop for about 12 days, and I didn't handle it well. And maybe she doesn't, I don't know, maybe she doesn't know that I was being a jerk to her, but I wasn't being very friendly to her deep down in my soul, right? Maybe the way what I said wasn't too bad, but I wasn't listening humbly and respectfully, and I wish I had of, and we're not going to change a thing based on what she said, but I could have at least listened humbly to her and maybe won her over a little bit. And then say this point, don't take it personally. And I didn't take it personally at that time. This is the only area that I usually do a pretty good job in. I don't usually take criticism too personally. Even if it is personal, I try to remember that when we're messing with people's music, we're messing with something very near and dear to their soul. And so even a personal attack or lashing out at us based on what we've done with music is probably really coming out of a place of pain for them and not really because they don't like us. And so just try to remember that this isn't really about us, and we're just doing what we believe we're called to do. And so don't take criticism too personally. You can't please everyone, and that's just the way it is. Don't pass the blame. Even if your drummer really was playing too loud, don't pass the blame to him. Let the buck stop with you, because that's good leadership. If you're in charge, be in charge. And if the drums were too loud, it's not your drummer's fault. Maybe it is, but that's a conversation with your drummer. When you're taking the criticism for it, you take the blame and you own it. Okay? And then after that rips you to shreds if it does, make sure you have mentors in your life and you have other people in your life that can encourage you. And I think this is a really sad part of ministry, but it's obviously a reality of ministry that we're gonna have to take some of this. But you can have people in your life that are building you up. And it can be your pastor, it can be your spouse, it can be a fellow minister, it can be another minister in your area. Maybe you need a network of ministers in your area that are taking some of the same stuff you are. It's important. And you need to try to respond gently without becoming defensive. If you are doing exactly what you believe God has called you to do, then you shouldn't feel the need to try to defend yourself. Just take it and keep doing what you feel called to do. Let your pastor defend you. Let your fellow staff members defend you, and let your love for your congregation be your defense. And let God be your defense. You don't need to speak to defend yourself. That doesn't mean you don't fight for what you believe is right, and that doesn't mean you become a doormat. Okay? There's submission is a tricky thing, and I would recommend Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, and he's got a chapter on submission. And if this is something that you struggle with, of letting people tear you down without really ever being able to recover from it, that's maybe a good chapter to read. You need to stay in the Word of God, stay in prayer, ask people you trust to evaluate you, and then take that well, and then honor God in word and in deed. Okay? If you're honoring God with your mouth and with your actions, for one, you'll probably take less criticism, and you'll be able to work through criticism better. Any thoughts on criticism? Any personal stories? Ways you've overcome it?
I pass the blame.
Huh?
I pass the blame.
You passed the blame.
Actually, it was an organ service. I was playing the organ, and they said I was too loud. It's like, the elders told me to turn it up. It was Easter Sunday.
Well, it's probably your music minister's fault.
My wife says
Oh, that's
I stew on what was said. She's like, you're letting it ruin the rest of your day.
Yeah.
Don't let it. You got to tell somebody, and you're letting it stew. And I just,
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I'm working on is not stewing and just trying to see where they're coming from, and even when they're complaining about maybe just a piano being too loud. A piano? Seriously?
Right.
A piano with the organ, you're saying the piano's too loud?
Yeah.
I was just complaining.
I always tell people, if the contemporary service is too loud, go the traditional service. No, here's what I say. I'm sorry. If it's too loud, don't go the traditional service. Come the contemporary service, because our organ, I promise you, is louder than our praise band could ever be. We got the loudest organ. It's incredibly loud.
Is it pipe or
yeah.
speaker?
Yeah, it's a pipe organ. It's intense, man. It's beautiful though. All right, technology. How many of y'all have ever heard of Marshall McLuhan? He was a philosopher in the mid-20th century. He said, "The medium is the message." That's a pretty famous tagline. You may have heard that. The medium is the message. And what he meant was, what the technology that we use to transfer our message ultimately becomes a part of the message that we're transferring. Now, whether or not you believe that, at least let it sink in a little bit and cause you to think about the technology that you choose when you're doing worship. Okay, I always say it doesn't have to be loud to be offensive. Visual things can be offensive, right? And even soft music out of tune can be offensive. Right? And it doesn't have to be offensive to be loud. It can be mixed really well and sound amazing, or our pipe organ could be cranking out every stop. That might not be offensive, but it's probably over 100 decibels. But no one's going to complain because it sounds good, right? So just keep that in mind. The technology, we want to start with pragmatic technology when we're building new technology for our church. You want to ask these questions. Can the congregation hear the music and the worship leaders? Can they hear themselves? And can they see the lyrics? You know, these are technology questions that are very pragmatic. We're not doing anything beyond being practical. After we get these things nailed down, then we can move to aesthetics with technology. I think that's second in command, but it's important. And we want to ask these questions. How do we make it beautiful? And how do we make it meaningful? And how do we reduce distractions? That kind of goes in both camps, but I think that it can be part of aesthetic technology. We can use aesthetics to kind of cover up some of what our media and sound guys call gack, when they're talking about cables everywhere and all the cables everywhere with a contemporary worship band, and how can you use media or technology to kind of cover some of that and make it look prettier? Hide some of the cables. What can you do? Your checklist, I don't need to read through that. You've got it in front of you. But I'll talk about monitors real quick. We use in-ear monitors at our church. And if you're in a position where your church can use in-ear monitors, it really helps your sound guy a lot because you can keep the volume on the stage down. So we don't have to have my voice cranking over the volume of the drums on the stage, and because I've got it right here in my ears. And after your church, if you do implement in-ear monitors, then you can start using things like in-ear metronomes and click tracks and stuff like that to keep the band together, which ultimately is going to help you sound a lot better. And so, but just so you know, I've led worship for a lot longer without in-ear monitors than I have with. I'd never used in-ears until I came to Houston. And so you don't have to have that. You don't have to have that level of technology. It's very expensive. But if you can afford it and it's a resource you can get, use it because it can make it better. And it can make it better for everybody. Okay? So, y'all can see all that. Lighting is last there, and I didn't even list video stuff. Media guys love video stuff, and they love to spend money on new cameras and all this stuff. But you need to ask the question, how is that enhancing worship at 11 o'clock? Is it making it better in the room and in the hour? And if it's not, then it's a lower priority, but new cables aren't as glamorous as new cameras. And so sometimes, if you got the budget sitting there to do it, your guy's going to want to buy some new tech for their cameras. And you may have to fight for that. But I just think that video stuff is a lower priority when we're talking about engaging people in worship. Now let's talk about unity in worship and song selection. We don't often think of contemporary music as being a space for unity, especially when we're talking about transitions. But I think it can be if we choose our songs wisely. First thing, you want to choose songs that focus on God and the saving work of Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit. You want to choose familiar songs Ooh, where am I? This doesn't even look like the same thing as in the handout, does it? Choose. You want to keep musical stylings as eclectic as possible. So if you're going to do a new Hillsong Young and Free song, if y'all know what that is, it's like a dance party. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but if you did, then it might be wise to follow it up with something that sounds a little more folksy and acoustic driven to kind of lighten it up a little bit. And the more you do this sort of thing, the more you mix it up, the more you give people a chance to kind of find things that they connect to. 5 minutes, all right, cool, thanks. You want to avoid controversial elements in worship for as long as you can if you've made a transition to a new worship style. So say you've got some, so say you're in a church, most of us are in pretty traditional background kind of churches. We got Lutheran, Anglican, Methodist, and Baptist. So not a whole lot of charismatic background from our traditions. So say you've made this transition to contemporary worship, and someone comes up and says, hey, I make these praise banners and I like to dance with them. You mind if I dance up on the stage next Sunday with my praise banner? Well, if you've been in this for a year, it may not be a good time to do something like that. It may never be a good time to do something like that. Maybe someday, I don't know. But that's going to be controversial. A dance in and of itself can be controversial for any of our traditions in this room. Now, if we had some more charismatic traditions in the room, it wouldn't be as controversial. But so how do we handle things like dance? How do you work it in? You need to be careful about it, and you need to make sure it's not going to create controversy. You don't need unnecessary controversy. I'm not saying don't use dance. I love dance, and it's a beautiful expression of worship. And so I'm not trying to pick on that. I'm just talking in general. Try to not be controversial.
What about sign language?
Sign language, I think, is great. If you have a group doing sign language to a particular song, that's really cool. Kind of like an expressive thing. If you have hearing impaired people in your church, then you need to have it. I think if it's something that's like there's no hearing impaired person in your church, and you have someone that wants to stand up at the front and do it in a way that everybody sees and notices and recognizes, you just need to question why that's happening. I think with all things, there needs to be a practical element to it. And I think that if you have people that need sign language, then you need to use it. If it's just something that's ongoing all the time and it's someone's expression of worship, that's fine. But maybe don't try to highlight it.
Right.
I would never stop someone from doing that if they were just sitting down there in the pews doing sign language during a worship service. But I wouldn't highlight it until it became a need.
Maybe a possible special.
Yeah, and then I've used it a lot as specials, a lot through the years. So it's a great way for students to kind of engage and get involved. Like drama teams will do that sort of thing, and I think it's great. It can be really beautiful. Sign language is cool because a lot of the signs we recognize. We know, like when we see the sign for breath, though I can't think of what it is right now, but when you see it, you think breath. It's so
Reinforcing.
yeah, what am I thinking of? It makes you think of what you're hearing, and it can be really powerful. So I like for things to be planned. I just don't like too much chaos, and I think people in general don't like too much chaos. So things like that just need to be orderly. You need to agree with your pastor. On song selection, you don't need to pick songs that your pastor doesn't want you to sing. That's important. And if your pastor ever mentions that you might do this song, you should probably try to do that song. Now, Dwayne, sometimes he mentions really weird songs, and I don't care if he sees the video. Sometimes he does. I'm just like, I don't know if I can make that one work. I'll let Carlos make that one work in the traditional service, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. And, you know, that's okay. He doesn't get mad, and he never tells me, you got to do a song. And so, but just, you know, if he wants you to do one, it's probably worth doing if your pastor really wants you to do a song. And so, listen to song suggestions from church members and take them seriously. And if you can work them in, then do it. You know, that can be a way to build a bridge. But if it's not, if it's a song suggestion that there's just no way it's going to work, then just receive that suggestion with grace, and just if you need, if they press the issue and you've got to tell them no, then just do it as gracefully as possible. But if it's something you can make work, that can be a way you can build a bridge and show someone that you're listening and that you care what their input is. Okay? All right, well, that's all I have for that session. And you got any questions or comments on any of this?
No, it's helpful, thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. If you're not able to or want to do something different for the next session, I have the handout for the next session if you want to take it.
I would.
Okay. All right.
Indoor on Friday